Okay, this final section of the intro revolves around matching up the stickers that we just talked about with the menstrual cycle. So the first part of the cycle is menstruation, as we talked about. So the endometrium is again falling apart, and this is why a woman will have bleeding in the first place. You're going to chart your sensations during this time. Now keep in mind, a lot of women will use feminine hygiene products. Totally understand this. We're not asking you to, go without any type of technology. So we're not asking you to not use like tampons or Diva cups or something like that. But try to clue into your sensations even on days that you use those products. Okay, so notice this gal has a wet sensation for 2 days, a moist sensation for 2 days. So she feels something, but she doesn't feel saturated. And then she feels dry on that last day and has spotting. Okay, so notice the different sensations. That is very important that you put sensations, because if you don't, it might limit the days of intercourse that you have. Now we go into the second phase of the chart. This is the gal who has the dry BIP. So this might be half of you, ladies, and you might not fall into this category, but we'll talk about you next if it doesn't. So this would be a gal who has totally dry days after menstruation. So notice she's dry starting from day 5, even though she has spotting. And then she's going to chart the green sticker for dry, nothing felt, nothing seen. Again, sperm cannot enter the cervix at this time. She is infertile. Now here's the other gal. Same thing is going on at the cervix, so we don't see any change in this. The difference is just this gal always has some sort of discharge. She feels sticky, so it feels like her labia are stuck together, and she sees a cloudy discharge. Again, as I mentioned, my wife and I are in this category. We have a moist sensation, so we feel discharge. We feel the sensation of moisture. It's like a humid feeling, and there's like a dry discharge on the underwear. That's what we see. So every woman is different. Keep that in mind. Now the first cycle, you'll chart that as white babies, so it just looks like you're fertile. Okay. However, the second time we notice it, as you can see over here, we're going to chart the yellow sticker to indicate that this is an infertile, unchanging pattern. So notice how since we have the sensations being the same thing every day and the observation being the same, we know the hormones are just flatlined. They're not doing anything. So that's important to keep in mind. Now we're going to chart it like that consistency. And if you're married, at this time of the cycle, you wouldn't be able to have intercourse here until the 4th cycle. So I do want to keep that in mind. So here are both gals side by side, the dry gal and the gal with the sticky sensation with cloudy discharge. Keep in mind, this yellow sticker does not mean sticky cloudy. This might be a different thing for you. Don't think that if you have a sticky sensation, you have to use yellow. Right now, you need to use a white baby. Okay. Now, on day 10 for the first gal and 11 for the second gal, they have their day of change. So now, at this point, they are both fertile. The gal on the top has a moist sensation. So does the gal on the bottom, but she notices clear discharge. The mucus plug is broken down on this day, and you are now potentially fertile. Again, if you have intercourse on a day like this, you could get pregnant if peak happens within the next 5 days. You're now going to have a changing, developing pattern. So notice the sensations and observations that we see. Now, they don't all have to change day by day. Notice we have 2 days of moist sensation, so she feels the presence of moisture. Okay, like a humid feeling. Then she feels saturated for 2 days, a wet sensation. And then she's got that intensely wet sensation where she's slippery. So she has 2 here, and 1. She's got cloudy, clear, 2 days of clear, in fact. And then 3 days of clear. And then we have a stringy discharge here on this day. So notice how both the sensations and the observations are increasing in pattern. They're getting more and more fertile, more and more fluid, and less and less viscous. Okay, so as she gets closer to peak, if you were to graph out those hormones, you'd have a flat line here, and it would be climbing during this time. So keep in mind, when you're getting close to peak, the hormones are going up. They're not stagnant. Now, peak is going to be the last day of that slippery sensation. There are 3 requirements for peak. The first requirement is a changing, developing pattern. We just explained that. Day by day, she's going to get more and more fertile leading up to that peak day. So she can't get really intense and then go down. She also can't be wet for 5 days and call that a peak. She has to develop during this time. Okay, it has to end in slippery. So you've got to have at least 1 slippery day. Some gals have more than 1. It just depends. There's nothing wrong with you if you only have 1. And then you're going to have an abrupt change the next day, and you will not be wet or slippery for 3 days. So let's explain what that would look like. So notice here, changing, developing pattern. The days get more and more fertile as she gets closer to day 15. Second of all, we have slippery on 2 days, 14 and 15. So we've got that requirement, so that's 2 out of 3. And then notice how she goes from slippery to dry the next day. That's the abrupt change we were looking for in point number 3. Okay, so basically what we're looking for is the pockets of Shaw have to activate under the influence of progesterone, and that changes your sensation from this day to this day, where you're slippery here and you're going to be something much less the next day. In fact, she was totally dry the next day. So that is what we would call a peak. So again, peak will come, by the way, the amount of white babies you have will vary. Some women have as little as 3, and some women have as much as 7 to 10. Okay, it's more common to have about 5 to 6 white babies, maybe 7. It will end in slippery, and you will have that abrupt change as we talked about. And you will not be slippery or wet for 3 days. Here they're only showing you the first day after peak, but in a second they're going to show you all of them. Okay, we will mark peak with an X on the chart, as you can see on day 15. And we're going to use green or yellow babies on the 3 days after. Now, after peak, again, as the slides talked about earlier, that mucus plug will start to reform at the bottom of the cervix. That takes 3 days for it to happen. Again, ovulation can happen up to 2 days after peak, so the ovum could still be alive during this time. So your window of ovulation is 15 through 17. It could have occurred anywhere on those 3 days. 24-hour lifespan of the ovum means that the ovum could live up till day 18. Notice how she has a dry sensation for 2 days. Those are green babies. Then she has a yellow baby right here to indicate that she had the presence of some sort of discharge or she felt something other than dry. In this case, she had both. So green baby, yellow baby. Green baby, yellow baby. But this is a peak. If she had any wetness in here, like these days, we would not be able to call that a peak. And then we have the last phase of the chart, and that's where you're infertile again, so the luteal phase. Okay, so keep in mind in this situation, the mucus plug is in place, ensuring that you're infertile. And so we know that you cannot get pregnant again. So again, I want to highlight this to show you. The infertile days for this gal in this chart are from days 5 through 10, and then 19 all the way to 29. Okay, so half of the chart is infertile. These days are only possibly fertile. In retrospect, we can see they're not really connected to fertility, but day by day, you won't know what's going to happen the next day. And then she's fertile from 11 to 18. Okay, now you're getting a new woman each chart. So just because you had peak on day 15 this chart doesn't mean you're going to have it on day 15 next chart. Okay, so don't apply rhythm and don't assume that the same thing will happen next cycle as it did this cycle. Okay, now the next thing to go over is the rules. This is not part of the intro. We will talk to you about the rules on session 2. So please ask us about that on your first chart review. From here, you need to go to the video entitled What to Do Next.